Coming up on the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, we are going to look at the offensive lineman grades. We're going to look how they did in spring, and we're going to tell you what to expect moving forward. We're also going to talk a little NFL draft. Today is probably the day that Matt Corral gets picked, if he doesn't get picked on Thursday night, because full disclosure, this is being recorded Thursday morning. But we're going to talk about that a little bit. This is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Willis, and thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. So do us a favor and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Hit the bell for notifications when we upload a new video, and of course, upvote the video itself. All those things would be greatly appreciated, and thank you for doing that. Also, if we hit 1,000 subscribers, which we are well on our way to do, right now we are sitting at about 80% to our goal that we have done in 4 months. If in the next 4 months we get about 200 more subscribers, we will do a post-game live in the college football season. We have a yes from a former Ole Miss legend, because I will call him a legend, and I really am fired up about him being on the show. And we have a high school coach, and we're going to talk for about a half hour. That's it. It's not going to be a huge time commitment about the Ole Miss game that you just witnessed. We're going to tell you what happened. We're going to break it down a little bit, and we're going to look at it big picture, and even maybe go into next week of what this game could mean. So that will be the post-game live if we hit 1,000 subscribers between now and football season. The day after football season doesn't happen. Day before football season happens. So do that. Also evangelize this. Tell a friend about this. Send a link to a friend. Put it on Facebook. Share it to expand the knowledge of the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. We are growing like absolute crazy. We're in negotiations right now to have it appear on a TV over the top, like a Plus app. So it'd go places besides YouTube and increase our audience that way. So we are growing like crazy. Expect to hear me as potentially tonight talking Matt Corral in the NFL draft with the Locked On NFL people. We're going to talk about that in a little bit in the second segment. So the offensive line grades. Now, I need to put a disclaimer on this one. I'm going to give their grade a C, and that's not necessarily because they did anything poorly. It's not necessarily because they did anything great. A spring game, the defensive line has the advantage, and that's mainly because of the quick whistles that are happening to prevent injury. So you can't really get a read off the offensive line because everything is set up and slanted for the defensive line. It's just the way it is. And add into the fact that 80 to 90% of the plays we call is an RPO, which means the offensive linemen are run blocking. So even on a pass play, if they get pass protection, you could be off on your run block, and that pass is held a little bit too long, and all of a sudden he gets pressure, and it looks like the offensive line is at fault, but it isn't. It's a schematic thing. It's a risk that you're willing to take to have the quarterback get the ball out on time. This is one situation that got Jackson Dart in a little bit of trouble. Now, he was working with the two offensive line. I get that. And the defensive line is pretty much 3 deep at this point. Not necessarily top end Robert Kindici, Pray Jerry level, but right in that second level. A whole bunch of Marcus Tillmans on that defensive line in the 3 deep. So they're probably about even with the first team line. They're probably a little bit better than the second team line. You add into that Jackson Dart holding the ball a little longer than he's supposed to hold it, things like that, and the offensive line is going to look worse than they really were. Now, were there plays that the defensive line just absolutely whipped the offensive lineman and came through? Yeah. You probably run blocking, got caught wrong-footed, the defensive lineman was able to get around. Yeah, I understand that entirely. But because of all this and everything tilted to the defensive line, you can't really get a read on the lines from a spring game. That's the reason we're going to rate this as a C. I would say incomplete, but we did that with the wide receivers, and I don't want to overuse that. But if you look at the first team offensive line, like Mason Brooks, absolutely fine. I say shout out to his grandpa who watches the show, by the way. But I'm not doing that because he watches the show. He actually played pretty well. Jeremy James did some good things. He's got some work to do on the left-handed side, especially with all those beasts that's going to be lining up over him, like Will Anderson in November, Mason Brooks, and Jeremy James. They're going to have to deal with Dallas Turner and Will Anderson. So they've got to be ready by then. So Texas A&M signed 800 5-stars. They paid for them all. They got them all. They're going to have to see them later in the season. So they've got a little time to get ready. There's a lot of reps between now and those football games for them to get ready. And, Kentucky, which has Charlie Weiss Jones and Keydron Smith now, coming into Oxford first week of November or October. That is probably the first game where Ole Miss needs to be hitting on all cylinders. They need to be where they need to be by then. You got 4 games in September, 4 games, honestly, that Ole Miss would probably win the game. Ole Miss should start off 4-0. If they don't, it's because quarterback play let them down. And I'm just going to say that right now. If quarterback play let them down, they end up losing a game in the first 4. And the most probably at-risk team, by the way, in the first 4 that Ole Miss needs to worry about is probably Tulsa, to be honest. I'm just saying that right now. But Tulsa is one of those sneaky teams. They gave Cincinnati a game last year. I don't know if they're going to be able to do it, but I think Philip Montgomery is the coach, and he is from the Baylor tree also, so it's going to be a lot of that Baylor offense. So expect them to explosively move down the field. Now, what we're seeing, by the way, in college football, we'll talk about this a little bit in the second segment, is basically the G5 is turning into the minor leagues for the P5. And you're going down and kind of cherry picking talented players. The players that you missed on in recruiting, and they fell through the cracks, and Toledo was able to get this defensive lineman that's been all conference this whole time. Power 5 teams are swooping in and getting that guy now because tampering and all that is happening. There is no security guard guarding the door anymore. SMU situation in 1986 when they got the death penalty, that's probably going to happen in the next 10 to 15 years again because of the fact that the NCAA has completely abdicated all responsibility. Mark Emmett is going to retire, put in his 56-week notice or something like that. I mean, he's supposed to go through June 2023. Well, in July 2023, the clock starts for the Power 5 to break away from the NCAA. Period. And then once that comes back, the NCAA is going to kind of try to grab greater responsibility. I think the NCAA wants the money teams, the Power 5, out. They want to deal with the G5 and the FCS and all that they can rule like they always have, but the amount of money that's in the Power 5 now, they want no part of because people are getting sued, NIL's happening. There's so many discussions that they just do not want to have that they're just nervous about it, honestly. So, offensive line, understand this in the spring game, and we're talking about it. I don't want to give them an incomplete. I'm going to give them an average grade of a C, but it's not because they did anything poorly. It's not because they did anything great. It's just the spring game is designed not for the offensive line. Everything is slanted towards the defensive line, from quick whistles and all the contact. I think it was a thud scrimmage, essentially, the spring game. So knowing that, and it shifted, and then you add on like the RPO where if the quarterback holds the ball, you don't know who is at fault on a stat unless you look at it 3 or 4 times. The fact that they're run blocking, because they're not kick stepping and going back 3 yards and blocking like they used to think. Remember, football is not like it was in 2008. It's all changed. It's all different. You would not even recognize it in the same way that you probably wouldn't recognize Ole Miss football from 1959 and what they were doing and how simplistic it was. But I think the offensive line's in good shape. I think there are 7 pieces or so for the fall. There's usually a 7 or 8 man rotation at best, by the way. So anybody that tells you need to go out and do this, you need to do that, they're right where they need to be. Fall camp, you develop that one guy that's going to play. You've got an 8 man rotation. You need an extra tackle, an extra guard. You need a backup center. If you have those, you're going to be in good shape. I think the offensive line is going to be fine. I do think that we're an RPO system, and if the quarterback holds the ball too long, the offensive line could look worse than they actually are. If the quarterback does what he's supposed to do, and with them run blocking, because they are run blocking on an RPO, and we are 80 to 90% RPO. If the quarterback does his job, the offensive line will be fine. The indecision of the defense, if we're doing the RPO correctly, the fear of Zach Evans, the fear of Michael Trigg behind them, the fear of the slot receiver, if that is working correctly, that is going to contain the defensive pressure, but their indecision is going to do it. It's kind of like let the defense make their own prison. That is pretty good. But I'm pretty happy with the offensive line after the Grove Bowl. I do want to see it in the Troy game, honestly. That's the first real test. Coming up next week, we are going to go to the defensive side of the ball with the defensive line, the linebackers, box safeties, and cornerbacks. So that's 5 for next week as well. So we'll continue our report card series. Summer is coming, and with summer, you're going to need some food on the go. Built Bars are the perfect snack to take with you on your family vacations. Throw them in your bags and your kids' backpacks. Make sure that everyone has a bar so that you're fueled for your summer adventures. The best part about Built Bars, they're healthy and delicious. No more sacrificing delicious food for health. With a Built Bar, you can have both. It's easy, and now all you have to do is go to Built.com and order now. So, there's a whole bunch of stuff. Have you tried the Built Puffs yet? We're going crazy for the Puffs. They come in crazy flavors like banana cream pie and even churro. Who doesn't want a protein bar that tastes like a churro? And they're only 140 calories. Sign me up. Go to Built.com and get all your favorites. Banana cream pie, raspberry, double chocolate, and so many more. They're all delicious, and new flavors are coming out all the time. Check them out at Built.com. So here's your offer. Go to Built.com, use promo code LOCKED15, all one word, and get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. All right, thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. So now for big announcements. For our first time ever, Locked On is hosting live coverage of the 2022 NFL Draft from our studios in Dallas with pick-by-pick analysis from our local team of experts and draft gurus. Tune in all for 3 days as our draft team guides you through every pick and every trade in real time. It started yesterday. It goes through Saturday. You can check it out on the Locked On NFL YouTube channel and on the Audacity app. So that should be really, really cool. You can tune in for that. Also, one thing we want to talk about is basically in the first segment, I talked how the G5 is becoming a minor league for the P5, and that's because of the transfer portal. And you're going to see people raising all manners of hell about this process, but it's absolutely real. Players like Rob Gronkowski, that was maybe a 2-star coming out of high school, that ended up playing tight end at Iowa. I mean, Iowa is good, but if he'd went to Central Michigan or something. Troy Brown at Ole Miss right now. That's a good example. Troy Brown at Ole Miss. He was an all-MAC player for 3 straight years. First team, good linebacker. Did a lot of stuff that made the Central Michigan Chippewas borderline competitive in some games and made their defense pretty tough. Well, Ole Miss just went in and grabbed him as a grad transfer. He's going to play there, and he's doing that to help his draft stock. Because you can go to Central Michigan, but he's going to have to deal with the questions of the competitions he played against, mixed with his size. Is he a good player? Was all of that a separate thing? Well, he gets a year at Ole Miss to go against the best of the best. He's going to line up against Texas A&M. He's going to line up against Alabama. He's going to line up against LSU. And in doing that, he's going to be able to put out a lot of film of them playing against elite players. So they can't use that argument. It takes that argument out of the equation of this competition and what he did, because he's going to have film against the best of the best. So if he can prove that, then he becomes a regular linebacker. And the last 3 years where he was an all-MAC player becomes a resume builder and a bump instead of a reason for questions, if that makes any sense whatsoever. So that's the reason Troy Brown did it up at Ole Miss. And there are several players around the country that did this. A step up. Ulysses Bentley went to Ole Miss. From the G5 to the P5. Or I guess that was the American. They were the P6, whatever. Anyway, but there are teams all over the country that use that, and they're going through and cherry picking them. And you're going to see those G5 schools cherry pick the ones that fell to FCS. The reason that maybe North Dakota State has been so good over the last couple of years, those players that fell through the cracks, they did a great job of developing and evaluating. Now you can have a G5 team come through, let's say Memphis, and cherry pick that. Also, the G5 schools can get people that are stuck on their current depth chart. Let's say the third string quarterback at Tennessee is not going to get on the field. Let's say Hendon Hooker is the guaranteed starter. Maybe Joe Milton decides he wants to play quarterback 1 year and goes down. The G5 is going to be the landing spot for that guy. So it's positive for both ways. It allows exposure to get ready. It just allows people that don't play at the Power 5 level to get some film on tape, to kind of become that guy. It allows the G5 guys to increase the level of competition, to take that question out of people's mouths. And that is why the G5 is essentially going to become a minor league for the P5. And you're going to see this more and more and more. Even the teams that cherry pick, you will see Alabama and Georgia take guys like that. They're normal recruiters. They're going to sign probably 20 players a year, 20 out of the 25 a year, and then they're going to leave like 5 spots open for transfers. But a program from Ole Miss is probably going to sign 10, 11 a year and leave 15 open for transfers. The G5 is going to try and find those diamonds in the rough. They're going to look for transfers from the Power 5 level that want to come down, but used to they'd go down to FCS. Like Randy Moss at Marshall, that wouldn't happen anymore. He would end up going somewhere in the G5 after he left Florida State. At that point, he might have went to like West Virginia. He might have been a Mountaineer. The only reason he probably didn't is because he would have had to sit out a year. But in this situation, he would have probably dropped down. Now, I know West Virginia is Big 12 now, but back then they were Big East. Playing Pittsburgh every year. Oh, that rivalry's coming back. By the way, I'm looking forward to the backyard brawl and that situation happening. But this is going to be a good thing, people. It just is. This allows a program like Ole Miss that will perpetually struggle to sign all the blue chip guys. They're a small school. They're not the Power One. They're not the super recruiters. And also in the age of NIL, they're a poor school. They don't have the biggest alumni base. Ole Miss is at a disadvantage there, but they're not at a disadvantage in the transfer portal. They're building up a huge brand where you can go. Let's say these players go to Texas A&M. Let's just say this is a complete hypothetical. At 17 years, you think they're going to get pissed off sometime in the next year? Not playing is a rough thing to do. What are they going to do? They're going to look to go out on the first thing smoking because that's what happens now. Where is going to be the landing spot? The place that is the transfer-friendly place. They're advertising for it. It is their brand. That's the place where they're going to try to land. And Ole Miss has a chance to do very well in that. Other schools, the big recruiters and the NIL schools, are going to sign a bunch of high school players because they can. But that also means they have to keep them happy. And they're not going to really be able to do that. Even at a place like Alabama, they're not really going to be able to do that. Keeping 85 kids happy is a hard thing to do. So, just understand, this is one of the best possible situations for Ole Miss. Ole Miss's talent base in the last year has gone from having 17 high school 4-stars or higher to around 34 in 1 year. This is a big boon. This is a big deal. Lane Kiffin is looking around Oxford and setting down roots. I didn't think he was going anywhere quickly, but he's putting down roots according to everybody because he sees a path for Ole Miss to be elite, and it is the transfer portal. People that don't think that the transfer portal can be used or whatever is because they are financially tied to high school recruiting. Understand that. That's On3, that's 24/7, that's Rivals. They're going to talk about it because they have high school recruiting rankings and they're set windows. It is in their best interest that signing day is the way it always was. Because that is a moneymaker. I know, I worked at Rivals for 10 years. But understand the ulterior motives behind recruiting. Whenever they say, oh, you can't do that. No, you don't know. You don't know if they can do that. But if those players would have signed with Ole Miss out of high school, they'd have thrown Lane Kiffin a parade. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. So, BetOnline is your number one source for all your betting stats and sports information. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs and the start of the Major League Baseball season. BetOnline is your continued source for sporting wagering. That's a weird word. Information from live betting, playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. I think it's set up that Ole Miss is a plus 500 or 5,000 team to win the CFP playoff. And, that's a cool thing. We're going to keep that box up there so we can, it might say that same betting thing leading up to football season, but the game lines and stuff like that, we'll use it for that. So it should be a lot of fun. All right, thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day. The Locked On Ole Miss podcast, that is. Your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including iTunes. Don't forget to rate us and review us there. Give us a 5-star review. You can say whatever you want. Just give us a 5-star review. We'd appreciate it. It'll help others find the show. We're growing like a weed. By the end of football season, it might be a global domination type thing. With what we are trying to do. The Locked On Network is a network unlike any that I've seen in college football. They're going to build it up, and it's going to be really cool. If you look at the Locked On NFL channel, they're doing NFL draft coverage right now. I should be on it tomorrow to talk about Matt Corral. And a little sneak preview of what I'm going to say is Matt Corral's leadership is probably the most unbelievably special attribute of him as an Ole Miss Rebel. It's why he is so beloved. If you look at measurables, Eli Manning is by far the best player to come through Ole Miss. If you look at statistics, it's not as good as Chad Kelly. Even in a season, Chad Kelly had the third highest total offense season in SEC history, behind Johnny Manziel's 2 years. But everybody wants to put Matt Corral in a special category. Now understand, the measurables aren't as good as Eli. The stats aren't as good as Chad, and you can understand why he would fall a little bit. People would be able to talk themselves out of taking him. He might have been a 6th pick and he falls to 12, and they can justify dropping him to 18. And then all of a sudden, maybe 25. Because others' measurables or little things that they're trying to analytically look at players. Malik Willis has an absolute gun, can run like a deer. He's 6'3", 220 pounds or something like that. And you look at Matt Corral, who dealt with injuries at the end of last year. This is not a slight if he falls to the second round, by the way. It's the result of NFL teams overthinking this. It's the result of NFL teams talking themselves out of taking him, because they all had this conversation. Every single one of them that looked at a quarterback, he was at the top of their board, and they slowly started to talk themselves out of it. I think now the BetOnline odds has Matt Corral as the betting favorite to be the 4th quarterback taken in this draft. And that's absolutely astonishing to me. Because the leadership level is something you absolutely need. It's something that like Brett Favre does. It's something that Joe Montana used to do. It's that Tom Brady mentality. Drew Brees did it. You can't be special without it. And Matt Corral has it. Now, if you look at Matt Corral's arm strength, he won the long toss competition in high school, throwing the ball like nearly 74 yards or something like that. He has an absolute rifle for an arm. But all they can see is the fact that he hurt his ankle in the Sugar Bowl, or the Tennessee game. He's barely 200 pounds, or maybe a little above it. He's 6'1", 6'2". And my opinion is, take a coach like Dennis Allen in New Orleans. You just saw Drew Brees. You knew how to coach a player like Drew Brees. And it would behoove whoever drafts Matt Corral to treat him like Drew Brees. Do not coach him like a special player. Do not try to make him Pat Mahomes. Even though he can do a lot of the off-platform stuff, coach him like Drew Brees. His accuracy is special. His deep ball is special. He can really fire the ball in there. And if you do that, he is going to be fine. He's going to be absolutely fine. But when you look at this NFL draft, Aaron Rodgers fell to the late 20s. It's because teams talked themselves out of it. They don't go with the first impression. They don't go with the facts that are in front of them. They don't even go with the film that's in front of them. They go in with the questions of what if he fails? And 9 times out of 10, he does. The player does fail. And the player that you took at 6 instead of Aaron Rodgers fails. And you have egg all over your face because you managed to second guess yourself out of a Hall of Fame worthy quarterback with Aaron Rodgers. Now, I'm not calling Matt Corral a Hall of Fame worthy quarterback. I'm not doing that. I am saying that I would coach him like Drew Brees. I would put him on a team that has some weapons and experience. I think the Saints would be perfect for him. And if you understand that, and you understand what Matt Corral really is, you can do some damage. You can do some real damage at the quarterback position. Like Malik Willis, they look at him and they see, Lamar Jackson, or Steve McNair. I think anybody that drafts Malik Willis should not play for 3 years. They're not going to do that. They're not going to put dead money on the roster for 3 years. But they should. Put him in behind Ryan Tannehill and teach him the position. And then maybe in year 2, put him in there for a little bit. Just some mop-up work. Maybe in year 3, do splits. But do not force that kid in there. It has Jamarcus Russell written all over it if you do. Do not force Sam Howell into the game. Do not force Kenny Two Gloves in early. This is not a class of ready-made quarterbacks. There's no Jordan Herbert or Patrick Mahomes in this class. Even Patrick Mahomes didn't play immediately. But there's no Jordan Herbert in this class. There's no Josh Allen in this class. So if you understand that, you can develop and do what needs to be done. And it should be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to this season. I'm actually looking forward to watching all 4 of these quarterbacks develop. But if they rush it, if they put him on the field year 1, any of the quarterbacks, put them on the field year 1, we're going to be seeing that quarterback in the USFL or XFL. Period. That's just the way this is. They're going to flame out. They're going to Johnny Football it. They're going to sober Johnny Football it, that I call Baker Mayfield. So, understand what's going on. System makes the quarterback. Quarterback does not make the system. NFL teams do not realize that. People that are paid so much more money than me just do not get that. The system makes the quarterback, not the quarterback makes the system. If you find a perfect match of what's going on, you have a chance to be really successful. If you don't, the quarterback's going to flame out. You're going to blame everything on him, and you're going to find the next person. It's all about your evaluation. You got a whole bunch of guys picking quarterbacks that still think, okay, there's only one type of quarterback. They're still in the Dan Marino mindset from back in 1984. Because the person that taught them probably learned from the person that picked Dan Marino. But understand what's going on. People do not understand football at the level, even in the general manager level, the way they probably need to do, because they don't have to. They don't have to. There's no consequences for getting it wrong. You might lose your job, but you're going to lose your job in 4 years. You're going to lose your job in 5 years. And you're going to make your money and move on. And then the NFL is going to retread you likely anyway. So there's no real consequences to get it right. You are seeing NFL teams branch out to other than the 80s and 90s when essentially there were 2 systems of football in the NFL. Now there's probably 4 or 5. And because of that, different quarterbacks that had no chance of playing in the 80s and 90s have a chance to get in there because system makes the quarterback, not quarterback makes the system. It's an interesting thing, but just pay attention to that when watching the draft. There's going to be a whole bunch of people that are really good at picking players that you want to see. They're making lists for your benefit, not the players, not the GMs. It's all separate. It's all for entertainment purposes, but it's for your benefit. And the draft, sometimes the NFL teams, they fall into the trap of listening to the stuff that was designed for you, end up taking the player doesn't fit what they do. Because everybody thinks there's essentially one football player. Even the Rivals 100 or the 24/7 or the On 300, they rank it as if there's one type of football player. There's several types of football player. That's the reason Army wins games. They're sitting there with a bunch of 2-stars and they're beating people and winning 9 games a year. There's different types of people. The system makes the player, not the player makes the system. All right. Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. Tune in next week when we go over to the report card for the defensive side of the ball. Now make your second listen Locked On NFL Draft. Ryan Tracy and former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker bring the NFL Draft to life every day with insight and analysis on college football prospects and front offices. It is free and available wherever you get your podcast. I do want to thank everybody for tuning in this week. It's a little bit weird. Our guest didn't get to come in because I had family obligation, and that will go through about Tuesday. So thank you very much for watching. But until then, peace.